Unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we have succeeded, or shall we transgress them at once? How many times have you disagreed with someone or something and actually done something about it? This all exists from civil disobedience or the refusal to obey certain laws or ideals. Civil disobedience is a great way to make change as long as you are following your conscience. Civil disobedience is good because you can't have too much civil obedience. The minority of one's ideas can make a chain reaction for what's right, and the government does not always change their ways if you just ask. You have to prove them how much it means to you. If there is too much civil obedience, then everyone's ideas are based off of one's ideas, even if their conscience tells them that it is wrong. When men go off to war, they are too obedient to their captains, even if they are wrong. A common natural result of an undue respect for a law is that you may see a file of soldiers, privates, colonels, and all, marching in an admirable order over a hill and dale to wars against their will, against their common sense, and against their consciences. Henry is the person who quoted this as they try to explain how men at war turn to machines and just go through the motions according to what their leader says. What happened to their common sense? What happened to their conscience? They feel as if they are getting in trouble for standing up for what they think is right. Or they feel as if their opinion means too little to stand up to something like this. You hear about the heroes in war. These are the people who didn't turn into machines. These are the people who followed their consciences. These are the people who made moral distinctions without being scared. The Declaration of Independence is a letter from our army who made the moral distinction together that the King of England was not being just or fair. In return, instead of becoming his puppets, we followed our conscience and separated. We had civil disobedience here, not civil obedience, causing the people of the United States to be considered the heroes to us. There isn't just too much civil obedience in war. There's too much civil obedience everywhere. Another time in history where there was too much civil obedience was when Hitler was in charge. Hitler ruled, and when he ruled, he treated everyone like they were just flesh walking around. His followers lost sight of what was right and what was wrong and just did whatever their master said. In the beginning, when Hitler started to take control, if one of Hitler's followers had the civil disobedience to stand up to him, the outcome would have been drastically different. So many lives could have been saved. This is why civil disobedience is needed. Like the followers of Hitler, many people are afraid to be the minority because they think it won't make a change or a difference, or worse, it could get them killed. It's okay to be the minority. One person's decision to be civilly disobedient, as long as they are following their conscience, can make a big change and start a chain reaction. Rosa Parks was one of the many in the time of the African Americans when they were trying to be treated equals. Rosa Parks was a passenger on a bus who refused to give up her seat for a white man. Rosa Parks stated, "I knew that I had the strength of my ancestors with me." She was then arrested of not following the Jim Crow laws. This Montgomery bus boycott was just the beginning of the revolutionary era of protest for civil rights, proving that one man or woman can make a difference. In the same era, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the protesters and speakers who led the Montgomery bus boycott that Rosa Parks started. The racialists targeted King by abuse, arrest, and they even bombed his house, but he continued to follow his conscience and fight for what was right, even if he was the minority. In King's famous speech, "I Have a Dream," he says, "But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt." This means that no matter what, he wasn't going to give up, and he was going to fight for what was right. Dr. King started as a minority to help to create equal for the blacks, but he ended up having a huge crowd following him. In a previous era in history was the Salem witch trials. In the book, The Crucible, it tells a story about the people being blamed for witchcraft, and everyone was afraid to stick up for them because of the consequences that would have preceded them. Everyone was afraid to be the minority except for the hero of John Proctor. John stood up for this injustice even though he was the minority, and he knew of all the consequences. John made the change. Although in the end they take his life, he proves that the government was wrong and that there never really were witches. This also proves that minority can make a difference. In the Salem witch trials, it took a lot of civil disobedience from Proctor for the judges to believe that there wasn't really any witchcraft and that they were just killing innocent people. The government doesn't always change their ways if you just ask. Sometimes you have to prove to them what's right and what's wrong. In Malcolm X, he says, "I don't believe in any form of unjustified extremism, but I believe that when a man is exercising extremism, a human being is exercising extremism. In defense of liberty for human beings, it's no vice, and when there's no moderate in the pursuit of justice for human beings, I say, he's a sinner." This means that he believes in extreme civil disobedience, although I don't think that the extreme civil part of disobedience is good, but this is still an example of the belief that if you want to get the government's attention and prove to them what's right, civil disobedience is the key. From a less extremist point of view, Henry Thoreau wrote, "If any think that their influence would be lost there, and their voices no longer afflict the ear of the state, that they would not be an enemy within its walls, that they do not know combat injustice who has experienced little in his own person, cast your whole vote, not a strip of paper merely, but your whole influence." He is using this to prove that the government will listen to you through civil disobedience, even if you are the minority. An example of this in history is when Susan B. Anthony worked hard to put a group together for women's suffrage. She believed that women should vote. She was that minority at the time, but because she followed her conscience, we all can vote today. Through much of her civil disobedience, the government heard her and started to change because of her protests that just kept getting bigger and bigger. This proves that sometimes you have to use civil disobedience to get the government's attention. Civil disobedience was also important when America was forming. The Boston Tea Party is a great example of early civil disobedience. England placed a higher tax on America's goods, and the people stood up to them. They dressed up like Indians and dumped all of England's tea into the sea. This was a bold act on their part, and they definitely proved to the government what was right through civil disobedience. Without civil disobedience, we as people would all be controlled by one person, and there would not be a change in the world. Civil disobedience is a great way to make a change as long as you are following your conscience. So the next time that you think something is unfair or wrong, as long as you are following your conscience, don't be afraid to be the minority and be civilly disobedient. Thank you.